Community Corner is a program that highlights the contributions of volunteer organizations, groups like the American Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, and Crime Stoppers. These are the sorts of groups where people don't get involved because they want to make any money, but they want to make a difference.
There's people buried there. There's the founders of our city, of our county, are buried there. The pioneers of the West Coast are buried there. Their remains, their graves is what the argument is. That is what determines it being a cemetery, not just the headstones. Them being there is what determines that it's hallowed, sacred, one of the most sacred places in the city. The headstones is a byproduct. If we could get those back and put them on the graves, more so the better. That would be a historical restoration. And it would bring in an incredible amount of publicity to this town. I believe sincerely that we would have so much tourism if we restored this cemetery. People would come from all over to actually see a town that became aware of their heritage and pushed the city council aside and restored the cemetery as best as possible. Put a fence around the perimeter, just like California state law says. It would be an incredible tourist attraction for the city.
But I know that one of the leading people buried at the cemetery is Congressman Van Dever, William Van Dever, who also served in the Civil War, was a brevet general or something like that, friend of General Grant. When he was buried there, a large Egyptian obelisk was set up. I don't know what happened to the obelisk. I'm sure it was torn down. But that's a kind of cemetery art that probably graced the place. There were statues of angels and things like that. Those are all lost. Would you be wanting to perhaps reconstruct them or somehow redo that part? Or is it just those headstones that you can find that you'd want to put back?
Well, we can't reconstruct what we don't know was there. If we can retrieve some of these angels, some of these tall obelisks, and repair them, restore them, of course we can put those back. But we don't want to read more into it than what is there. That's a fallacy that a lot of preservationists and restorations get into. They put too much of themselves into the restoration, and it corrupts the restoration. We could only put what we retrieve. And I want to correct you on one thing, and it's not your fault, is the breveted Major General William Van Dever, who was buried there, was exhumed by his daughter in 1932 and reburied at Ivy Memorial Cemetery by the freeway. This is something that we just found out recently through working with some national Sons of the Union veterans organizations and going through our research. The research that I've been working on is what I've got from the city. And the city hasn't been keeping up on the details, so we have found out that he was exhumed and reburied there. He's no longer in Cemetery Memorial Park.
Is his gravesite marked at...
His gravesite was erroneously marked, not their fault, by a reenactment group, I think in 1998. They had a ceremony for him there and marked where he was prior to being exhumed. And I myself was a victim of this misinformation. We staged an entire reenactment of his funeral, where we went down Main Street with a horse-drawn carriage with a coffin on the back and the riderless horse and reenactment Union and Confederate soldiers and 21-gun salute and the cannon, the whole thing, and he wasn't buried there.
Well, I'm sure the other Civil War veterans appreciated it.
Much. I'm sure they did, very much so.
But you're right, though. But just because we don't have all the facts doesn't mean that we should do something about this. Now, I was reading in the paper, the reporters actually questioned a lot of the people who use the place as a dog park. As a matter of fact, my wife was up there, got into kind of a heated argument with a dog owner who claimed that there was no other place to run their dogs, let them run free, except that particular spot. Is that true?
No, that's not true. And that's, I feel very sorry for these dog people, what they're doing. They're incredibly a selfish lot. And I hope they come to the realization that they're actually defecating on our shared heritage. But it's been told to me that there's 2 other parks in the city that have fenced off areas that are for unleashed dogs to run. And the ease and the unenforcement of the leash laws at the cemetery is why it's attracting more and more people with their dogs. It's a 7-acre parcel. There's no law enforcement there that says they have to keep their dog on a leash. And the city council is actually promoting this, that you take your dog and defecate on our Pioneer Cemetery. It's a hellacious situation.
Yeah, it does. It is awful to think about men who built our community, people who gave so much of themselves, veterans and such, are now forgotten. Or if they have a small plaque, it's just a name and maybe a date. And that's about all that's left of a person's whole life buried right there.
You can think that this would be something that would be par for the course if World War I Gestapo troops landed at Surfers Point and came in here and found the cemetery and desecrated because it was a Jewish cemetery. Then you would say, well, it can be expected of the Nazis to do this. But these aren't Nazis. This is our very own elected officials that have done this to our heritage.
Why do you think they do that? Ignorance, or?
I can't figure it out. I really can't figure it out. It's got to be greed. They don't have to pay for trimming around the headstones. And they weren't paying for it before. Road crews were maintaining the cemetery. I think this is modernism. See, modernism elevates themselves up to a level to where they have the power to do everything that they want. And if they see something, they can trample right over there. And irregardless of what was there or what the status quo is, they're going to have their way. Whereas we're coming from a point of tradition. Our cemeteries are our heritage and our tradition. And modernism has taken that away from us. Modernism has taken away our identity. And the conflict here is between the two, against American tradition and where we came from and where we're going, and this modernistic greed and demonic mentality that we control everything and you're going to listen to us.
I'm sure it wasn't deliberate, but there must have been something. Certainly they weren't thinking about this in a long term. And maybe history just didn't mean as much as prophets or something. I can't say. You brought some photographs with us today. What exactly are these?
There's one of the rumors that is going around town is that the cemetery's been desecrated for 40 years, and now why the big stink? Yeah. And I wanted to prove that this big stink has been going on before the city actually grabbed the cemetery. So what I got here, this is a 1922 photograph, a 1929, overhead photograph of the cemetery. Here's the Catholic section, and you can see trees planted in a giant cross. And here's the Presbyterian section that shows the cemetery. This is a walkway, just a path that people have traveled through. And then the next photograph, here is a 1946 photograph, and you see the trees aren't as distinct anymore that show the cross here on the Catholic side. And a lot of other bushes have been planted up here. And there's some grass and whatnot in the walkways. This is 1946, right after the war. Okay, so then what we have is, this is 1958. And
I notice a difference here.
A big difference.
What are these white things on the Protestant side here?
Well, first of all, this was the recreation center that was put in by the city on the western 110.
Yeah, I remember that. I used to go there as a kid.
Right. There's some graves underneath the parking lot that everybody's denying, but the burial list says that they're there. And as you can see, this is 58. It was put in, the rec center was put in 55. But what you have here is, it looks like, from my interpretation, is all of the descendants went to their families' graves and poured concrete copings over the top of their graves to protect them from the pending encroachment, the interpreted encroachment by the city. If the city had grabbed this, there was a rumor out, I guess, that the city was going to come after the whole cemetery. And so in order for the people to stop the city, on weekends they went out and started pouring concrete on all of their descendants' graves, copings, to keep the city, to make it impossible for the city to do that.
So
Well,
they could do that legally?
it's their family grave. They can do whatever they want with it. City couldn't stop them until, here's the next photograph in 1966. The rec center's still here, but it shows that all of these tiny, well, they're not tiny if you're standing there on the grave, all these concrete copings have been removed. As you can see between the two
Yeah, especially on this side. Yeah.
there's an incredible amount of concrete copings that have been removed by the city, as they were now finally going to complete what they wanted, was the complete takeover of the cemetery.
Now this side here was the Catholic side, St. Mary's.
Correct.
This is a Presbyterian. Where was the Chinese cemetery?
Chinese were mostly buried in the southeast corner down here. And the Jewish section is, they bought some blocks right here in the center, and all of the Jews, by their names you'll recognize them. They're buried here in the Jewish blocks. And the majority of the Shumash are buried here in the Catholic, but there are some buried in the Presbyterian also.
Yeah, the Shumash who survived the missions were, well, devout Catholics.
Right.
As many still are today.
Right. So that dispels the rumor that there's a big stink about the cemetery now after 40 years. Well, the city has been fighting, the residents have been fighting the city council since before the city grabbed this property. The city has been doing everything they can to keep the cemetery out of their hands. And with their iron fist and their political power here, they've beat back all comers.
Now you have a nonprofit organization, a website that talks about St. Mary's.
Yeah, a pretty extensive website that has all of our research has been put on the website, and that's restorestmarys.org.
Now what could people do to help out your cause?
Well, the number one thing is there's an election coming up this fall, and 4 of the city council people are going for re-election. What we really need to do is not re-elect them. If they don't get re-elected, we break the back of this iron fist, this iron grip on our town that they've had for over 40 years. If we can get them not re-elected, I can guarantee you that in 90 days, we could start the restoration of the cemetery.
A lot of people say there's not enough money. These are trying times economically to do a project, important as it may be. Do we have the money to restore something like this?
I could guarantee you that we can get descendants and the Chumash Indian groups and the Sons of the Union Veterans and Confederate veterans and the Sons of the American Revolution, all these fraternal organizations, let alone the Friends of the Restoration, everybody donating time and money, and we can do it without the city's help.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Good luck on your project. I very much would like to see our cemetery look the way it did long ago. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Till next time, join us as we talk about the nonprofits that make Ventura such a special place to live. Thank you. Until next time.